Good evening for us, of varying degrees. Good evening. From the Regeneration Podcast, Michael Martin. Crops are kind of pulled in, but like life on the farm is not dead, is it? I've been loving this nice weather we've had in the Northeast because I feel like I can be creative in the fall in a way that I just haven't had a chance to with grapevines. I love it. I love it. I love it. Go ahead.
Yeah, what did I do? I haven't planted garlic yet. Like maybe next week. I gotta check the calendar, see what's a good day.
Yeah.
But that came in. That's why I'm dressed like a farmer because I was just tuck pointing my barn.
Tuck pointing.
You ever have to do that?
I don't know. I didn't have to do it because I wouldn't know what it is. So I'm
It's
two
when you
steps
have
removed from
to.
tuck pointing a barn.
Well, tuck pointing is putting new mortar in between the boulders on your foundation.
Oh, wow.
And I did it in the house, which is not too bad. But part of the barn, it's really no, no, it's the south facing side is.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of how your guest and I and you are going to have more in common than you'll have with I, because you're both of you are much more handy, more connected to the earth, as am I. And let me bring him in, then we'll double back to Michael here. But on the podcast this evening is I'm going to have him describe himself, but you're going to describe yourself. But I want to say I went to a bio of yours, Aaron, and I saw one at a university, Montana State University, but then I went to Front Porch Republic as well. And on Front Porch Republic, it was like a really sparse poem. Uh, Aaron, and do I pronounce it Weinacht?
That'll be fine. I mean, in German, it's Weihnacht, but
All right, all right. What do your kids' friends call your kids?
uh, I think just by their first names.
Okay, fair, fair, fair. So it
Yeah.
says Aaron Weinacht thinks about history books and builds furniture in Beaverhead County, Montana. Aaron, there's a story behind the very austere one at Front Porch. And okay, so weave that story into an introduction of yourself and who you are. And then you guys talk farm for a little bit. And then I want to talk to you about Dostoevsky.
Uh, well, I suspect that my I have evolved in such a direction that my university would probably have little desire any longer to be associated with me in public, and
Really? Get
so
specific on that a little bit.
uh, well, um, the older I get, uh, the more I I find that in anything that doesn't take the existence of the transcendent as its starting point is just simply futile, and uh, and of course, in a lot of ways, the modern public university has the opposite assumption
Okay, all right.
as its starting point, and so rather than pretend like that difference doesn't exist, I just decided to be honest about it.
Wow, good for you. You
You
and
must
Michael were
have tenure.
separated at birth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's academia is in a bad way, especially in the humanities, where
Yes,
the go
yes.
along to get along model. Are you an English professor?
No, I teach history,
Teach history? Yeah,
but
English.
I'm definitely coming at it from a humanities point of
Yeah.
view. Um, and actually, I should clarify, Mike. I'm at the University of Montana Western, not at Montana.
Western, thank you. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's states up in Bozeman, like 2 hours northeast of here.
Okay.
So we're down in far southwestern Montana. We're like, 60 some miles north of the Idaho border from East Idaho.
Where were you born?
Actually out in the plains in central Kansas, a couple hours southwest of Wichita. Um,
You're a real Midwesterner, man.
that's real flyover country, even
Yeah.
more here, of course, half the West Coast has moved to Montana in the last few years, so um, it's
Yellowstone.
yeah, it's a little less. Yeah, I think that's kind of contributed to it as
Yeah.
well. Actually, a couple of my girls work cook for a hay crew out west of Dillon here, and last summer when they were out there, the producers of the show Yellowstone came by and asked if they could park a bunch of equipment on the ranch ground that they were working for, and the woman they worked for kicked them off.
Wow, wow, wow. Interesting.
So, a bit of local flavor there, but yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I'm originally from Kansas, grew up for a while, I did most of my growing up in rural southern Indiana. Um, and but I've had family out this direction for years, so I ended up getting a teaching job here in Montana. Oh, let's see here. I guess I'm in my 18th year teaching here, so I've been here a good while.
Interesting. So what got you into the whole gig? And again, lead into Dostoevsky. What's the deal with him? You know, so you're like people make TV shows about somebody from flyover country in Kansas getting to college and getting a PhD. You know, there's a story there itself. Say more about yourself.
Uh, well, I don't know if my story's a good one or not, but I'll tell it to you.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I guess really what happened was I was walking past my dad's bookshelf one day when I was like 13 and ran across Crime and Punishment and thought, huh, I wonder what.
Wow.
So I
Glad I
picked
asked this question.
it. Uh, so I was kind of I don't know, a small C Catholic reader, I'd pick up and read, the back of the cereal box if that was what was handy. And so, so I kind of got really into Dostoevsky in junior high and high school, and
Wow.
that
Junior
led me to
high. Huh.
Tolstoy. So I picked up Tolstoy and Solzhenitsyn and a number of others. So I just kind of got into the Russian lit thing when I was in junior high and high school, and um, I'd actually I see you got a guitar in the background there. My plan had been to be a professional rock star. Actually, I've
You
been
guys were separated at birth.
yeah, I've been a bass player for most of my life, and so anyway, I was going to go to music school, but I never could come up with the money to go, and so anyway, I my parents had moved up to Muncie, Indiana, after I graduated from high school, where Ball State is, and I lived with them trying to save some money to go to music school, worked for, I've been a roofer and a hod carrier and worked landscaping and did some dead end factory jobs and all kinds of stuff. And anyway, I finally was just like, yeah, the music school thing isn't going to happen. So I just decided to go to Ball State and get a history degree and see what happened. And so I
Huh.
did. So basically, I'm sure I'm not the only person in this situation where I decided to go to grad school because I was pretty good at being a undergraduate history student, and I couldn't think of what else to do. And so basically, I got a PhD in, I think they said of the British Empire that sometimes how do they go, that Britain gained an empire in a fit of absence of mind. And I sort of got a PhD in history in a fit of absence of mind, a bit like the British Empire. So I sort of found myself here, I guess.
Hmm.
It wasn't, it was certainly not a plan.
Yeah. And let me tell our guests that the reason I invited you on the podcast, we've never talked before. A little bit of correspondence. Mostly, I think we saw each other in the comment sections
Yeah,
of Front Porch Republic. A
yeah.
little bit, Michael was on things about post-liberalism, like, what the hell happened to Patrick Deneen. And we
Yeah,
could get into that. That's why Michael's going to love
yeah.
this.
I
And
keep hoping he's going to write something that will answer that question.
yeah. And I wanted to meet this guy's personality who is behind these comment sections. And I can already let our fans or the listeners of the podcast know I'm glad I did. It's very interesting. Why did I invite Aaron on the podcast? No topic in particular. I thought he'd be an interesting guy to meet. It's not a bad way through life. You meet interesting people. Very interesting, Aaron. Say, Michael, what's your response thus far?
Well, I keep, I keep, so now that I'm out of academia, I just keep looking at it like, wow, that wasn't as much fun as I thought it was going to be. And because in the English department, what they say about the English department is where discredited theories from other disciplines go to die, which is which is true. Um, but yeah, I mean, I kind of came into it like you did. I got into poetry through playing the guitar and writing songs, as and then when I decided I didn't want to be living in bars for the rest of my life, I thought maybe I'll go to community college or something. And how, I think I always tell people that my GPA from high school was like 1.3 or something. It was horrible. And the punishment for that is you have to go to school for the rest of your life,
No.
which is what I've been doing.
If I could do high school again, I would make sure to have a 1.3 GPA. I would do even less work than I did the first time around.
Yeah.
Well, they graduated me to just get me out. Yeah. But yeah. But here, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, so down, do you live on a farm?
uh, Not really.
Really?
No, I've got 15 acres, but I mean, we're at 5,500 feet or 5,300 feet, I think it is, above sea level, and we get about 10 inches of rain every year. Uh,
Yeah.
so you don't. I mean, it's acres per cow, not the reverse
Yeah.
out here. So I have some
Wow.
kind of long-term plans to try and build up the dirt as much as I can out on our place and so on. But uh,
What's your method of doing that, Aaron?
uh, I'm gonna have looking at getting some pigs you can run on pasture actually, and then running my chickens behind the pigs. Do that kind of local, small area intensive grazing thing.
Works.
Thicken up the grass, get it, as little moisture as we get, at least get it to hold moisture better than it, as good as it can anyway. And we built our house, so in the shop I've got too. So I've I'm just really now getting to the point where I can start thinking about this stuff that's that's good to do as opposed to the stuff that absolutely has to get done, like say, a door to your bathroom. Uh,
Huh. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a priority right there.
yes, yes, there. Especially, I have 7 kids, and so when you have that many kids, having bathroom doors is rather helpful.
7 kids.
Yeah,
Wow. Wow.
yeah, we got it.
Now,
Also,
do you get some eye rolls from colleagues about having so many kids?
yeah, yes and no. It's kind of funny.
Well, I
You know,
have 9, and I used to get them all the time.
Oh, okay. Well, then you know about it then. Yeah. Sometimes I do. I think that
We got
my
it after 2. A lot after 2. They said you got one of each, stop. You got
yeah,
one of each, stop.
yeah. Yeah,
Then
it's
that number 3, they
fascinating.
called me Amish. Number 4, they thought I was like a polygamist or something.
That's
It's
right.
it's fascinating how maybe you guys have both had this experience, how people like who normally wouldn't comment on anything about you at all, suddenly all of a sudden feel free to do so when it comes to your kids. I've
It's
never quite
wild. It's wild.
my
And it
my
begins
wife.
with the everybody can touch the woman's belly, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. I think my wife takes it a little more on the chin than I do. Maybe I just look too scary to be the sort of person you make comments like that. I don't know,
Interesting.
but
Interesting. Say Dostoevsky. One of the reasons I'm asking is a friend of the podcast. You've heard me write about him, and even recently we mentioned that you and he were kind of looking at the same thing in a recent article you have at Front Porch Republic about the genesis of postmodernism and the end game of this kind of
yeah.
thing. But is it Guido? So you have those things in common. He's somebody who I had him on the Canon once. Michael couldn't join us, but in other context, doesn't say like there's nothing there in Dostoevsky. He certainly doesn't say that, but he doesn't know what the thing is. The thing is,
Oh,
and when I think of the thing, I think of like at level 1, that with very few words, you get a vision of some planks, wooden planks across a muddy Russian town, and how somebody can evoke a whole world, like a Tolkien-esque world, in about 2 sentences. I think of how he can make uh he proved to us that the idea of like for some temperaments being publicly embarrassed and humiliated is a form of joy. you know, he got below, and I've made the case at Front Porch Republic and others that at least Berjayev and related to some of the work of Theophan the Recluse, who was an authority on the church fathers, would say that Dostoevsky saw more than the church fathers did. And that means more than about Dostoevsky. It means, like, what do we do with, like, founding fathers? Do we revere them and hermetically seal them off? Or is there a continued thing? I know Michael's a big fan of hermetically sealing off the past and just worshiping it. Just kidding. But you know what I'm saying. So tell a little bit about Dostoevsky for those. How do you describe the thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you that yeah, his capacity for language that kind of puts you there,
Okay.
wherever there is, is pretty striking. I myself am not a gambling addict or a gambler at all, but I have heard it
Yeah.
said, I
Roulette.
have heard it said that his story, The Gambler, is the
Yeah.
greatest description of what it's like to be a gambling addict that has ever been written.
There's a whole book about that by a
Who would
former
know?
contributor at Chronicles magazine, Andrei Navrazov, son of Lev Navrazov, who's a political commentator. Andrei himself is brilliant, but he did this great series on gambling, and then huge parts on Dostoevsky. And that Roulette are one of the geniuses of modern literature, I think. And a lot of those are in a coffee table book. But, like, it was the same theme, but I mean, it's so deep. But you saw that, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's just my way of agreeing with, provide another example that agrees with your initial point there, just
Yeah.
about how he manages to create those worlds. But I guess I remember when I was taking a Russian history class as an undergraduate, I read most of Dostoevsky in one semester just to see what would happen if I did that, and uh, so sometimes you just got to go all out, and so anyway, I remember what really struck me then, even at the sort of callow youth stage, is how prophetic that guy was about the conditions we find ourselves in now, and in particular, what I've come to appreciate is, demons in particular, is
You
about the
bet.
group
Ideology.
of the nihilists. I mean, Dostoevsky didn't coin the term; that was Turgenev. But I remember back at that point originally thinking, well, okay, what nihilism meant was that it's all the people that don't like the stuff that I like,
Mm.
are the nihilists. But then once I, did some more reading and thinking, and once I wrote a doctoral thesis about nihilism, it sort of, I came to realize that actually Dostoevsky was right, at a much bigger level than just picking on people that, I probably disagreed with too if I'd been there, that his enemies really were nihilists in a fundamentally true sense. And so in a way, he's really, he's quite a prophet. I remember running across a bit one time where Nietzsche was apparently quite a fan of Dostoevsky's, disagreed with him on fundamental levels, but figured he was asking the right questions. And I think that's fairly telling, so um I really, and there's the holy fool stuff, with Mishkin and so on, that I think is important, but really, there's the theodicy stuff, right? The famous conversation between Ivan and Alyosha in the cafe that's around the Grand Inquisitor scene and the brothers Karamazov and so on. But I think, just like, if I was going to try and sum up it, as you put it, what is the deal, about Dostoevsky now? I'd say it's his kind of uncanny knack for prophecy that's couched in language that, as you started out saying, is incredibly evocative. So I don't know. That's it. Because I'm an unapologetic fan, any effort to sum him up at that level is going to oversimplify something. But off the top of my head, I think that's what I'd say.
Wow, prophetic and that kind of evoking worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. 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 Michael.
But you guys are clearly Dostoevsky fans yourselves. How does that ring with the two of you?
Mine can be briefer than Michael's. Michael knows more than I do on this, but I've spent my time with Dostoevsky himself. Right now, I'm on a Boris Pasternak thing, but those are intimately in conversation in my head, especially in areas having to do with theology, um, and the word life in particular. But I could even say more on that. But a lot of my take on Dostoevsky has been mediated through the Constant Garnet translations as read while he crossed the country in trains for years and years as they were coming out. One of the greatest, most perceptive minds in the history of the Western world, John Cowper Powys, his book on Dostoevsky. I wonder if even people read it. It's a mind blowing work that can evoke some of these things about Dostoevsky and can help the English reader, not only in Constant Garnet's translation, but others, start to see these worlds clearly. Because I think, that we started in a pretty deep place, how he evokes whole worlds with a less than a paragraph description of wood on mud.
I think I'm with you on the prophetic. I mean, but I think there's an interesting thing in that much of the Russian literature and philosophy of the late 19th and early 20th century that, well, it was super early, but it's prophetic, going into the sophiologists, and Dostoevsky's friendship with Vladimir Soloviev, who, according to some, was not only the basis for Ivan, but also the basis for Eloisha and the brothers Karamazov, and Soloviev and the narrative of the Antichrist. If you ever read, when I was teaching catechism for high school kids about 10 years ago, I had the kids read that and they were like, wow, Mr. Martin, this is happening right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
And the same thing, but you also see the same thing. I was just talking about this the other day. In Berjayev, there is such a strong prophetic strain in Berjayev, which I'm sure the godfather of all of that is Dostoevsky. And of course Dostoevsky, in his interrogation of modernity that goes through, that all the kind of psychological accompaniments to modernity that screw up all of his characters, and then but the thing is, he does, I mean, you could talk about nihilism, but his answer is not nihilism. His answer is faith, right? Which is, you could be prophetic like Nietzsche, but he's prophetic in, I would say, well, in both a traditional and a modern Christian way, because he's not he's not a cleric, right? And you see the same thing, and it's interesting. You look at Dostoevsky and Berjayev on the one hand, and compare them to Florensky and Bulgakov, who are both priests, who also have elements of prophecy, but they keep it reined in because it's they want to keep their jobs. You know what I mean?
but
But
Florensky was
not so with
killed.
the other two.
Right. I think the pillar and ground of truth is huge parts poetry. He
Absolutely.
insisted it was printed with these like, kind of cryptic images and things. His first proof is like a logical proof against the law of non-contradiction. In that I've been thinking lately that Florensky could be the one who takes us back to the pre-Socratics. Lately, I've just become obsessed with the pre-Socratics, and because it comes from the mental health people question in the underworld with young adults. We're being invited to go to this underworld, and the pre-Socratics went there. And you see that Plato was just kind of starting something. It was way too much light. And I think what's coming back is that with something like Florensky going at a logical proof against the law of non-contradiction to begin back to a higher logic, where logic and poetry start to mix up better.
Right.
And he's a prophet of that. He's one of them. But you're right. You're absolutely right at Soloviev, in my opinion, and Berjayev. But we'll see what Aaron thinks.
I've I've read and reread that whole landmarks collection. You know that Berdyaev and I think Bulgakov had didn't he have a contribution to that? I think he
I
did.
believe so. I've
Uh,
got in a couple old copies in my
yeah,
office. Yeah.
that one is really worn well, I think,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think that at the bottom of a lot of that is Dostoevsky, or at least Dostoevsky and Solovyov together.
Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah.
um, you know, one of the things that really stands out to me about the importance of the Russians in general, and then Dostoevsky in particular, as a prophet is, I think something that develops kind of uniquely in the Russian tradition is a kind of intellectual maximalism, where no matter what the problem is and the potential solution, we're going to take its solution to the most extreme extent possible. So, you've got you've got Charles Fourier, the utopian socialist, sitting in a hotel lobby in Paris for like 10 years, hoping somebody's going to show up and fund his philanthropy. It takes a Russian to actually attempt to build one. You know,
Okay. Huh.
there's is if I remember the story correctly, his peasants burned it down before it was done. And so if you go with Fourier's math, we'd only have like 300 years to go before we'd have all evolved tails and gills, but uh,
Wow.
anyway, it seems to be just kind of this consistent theme. You look at look at the emergence of the
Yeah.
anti-monarchist terrorist movement in the 1870s and 1880s. It'd be the last years of Dostoevsky's life. You've got um, uh, you've got people in the West in the mid 19th century are wondering about the effect of industrialization on human flourishing. Obviously, Marx being the most obvious
Hmm.
person to point to there, but it's Dostoevsky, it's that book Winter Notes on Summer Impressions, where he heads west and typifies the Crystal Palace at the Great Exhibition in London as this kind of archetypal spawn
Yeah.
of Satan,
Yeah.
and so the Russians really seem to have a knack for taking things to extremes, or as a maximalist kind of orientation, as I suggested earlier. And so I think that actually that contributes to what looks like a really prophetic witness to where we are now, because they're thinking things out
Yeah.
as much as possible. Dostoevsky's he's got his hero of the Notes from Underground, thinking things out and suddenly realizing that it'd be better if 2 and 2 equaled 5 instead of 4. You know, uh,
Pretty
so I don't know,
Socratic.
that's something that I think is important, right? If
Yeah.
you think you're free, just wait till you see how free I'm going to be when I even reject mathematical necessity.
Right. 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 Yeah.
It's kind of, at least that's I think a plausible reading anyway.
Wow. That's very, very deep.
No,
Tell us a little bit more about your engagement then with um like the Russian Silver Age and so forth. I kind of want to stay on this theme of Dostoevsky for a little bit,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, see what would be. Yeah, I think certainly like the Silver Age folks, Block and Billy and Zanaida Gippius, and the list kind of goes on, right?
I always love hearing these names pronounced correctly because when I read them, I obviously don't know how to pronounce
Yeah,
them.
well, my Russian is pretty rough anymore,
Okay.
so
Hmm.
I won't. I'm sure I'll butcher one here,
Hmm.
um, but yeah, and I think that there's a certain amount of inertia that I think maybe Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, but also Chekhov and Gogol and so on, that kind of great 19th century outpouring of artistic creativity. I think it really kind of creates its own inertia that helps contribute to the Silver Age. Uh, but I think another factor there too is that um, I mean, a lot of what the Silver Age folks were really um, thinking about wasn't so much. like Dostoevsky's, privileging of the transcendent as a context for living,
Mhm.
but kind of the opposite. I mean, one of the biggest influences on the Silver Age writers was Chernyshevsky's novel "What Is to Be Done," and that's a nihilist novel through and through. I mean,
Yeah, right.
that's the answer, as it were, to fathers and sons. Uh,
Mhm.
and so I think that, at least from my point of view, like part of what's so interesting about the Silver Age is if Dostoevsky's saying, what would it mean to live in a world where there was no God, the personal lives of a lot of the Silver Age folks illustrate an attempt to live out exactly that point. And
Uh-huh.
it doesn't end well. Obviously it generates all kind of artistic creativity, but creativity can take us a lot of different directions. I mean, it took Nietzsche into an insane asylum, right?
And you're also kind of saying when this virus takes over society, it can, without much of a problem, get to the level of exterminating people who disagree.
Yeah, I think so.
As he pours water, as if he's just like putting milk in his coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, uh,
Right.
I make coffee in my office on an old Burke pot.
Well, that's great.
Um, so I mean, what to me, like one obvious example of what you were talking about was that I wrote a book arguing that Ayn Rand was a latter-day version of the nihilists that Dostoevsky was talking about in Demons, or a little bit in Crime and Punishment and so on. And I don't know if you've ever run across this, but Whitaker Chambers famously demolished Rand's novel Atlas Shrugged in the National Review. That was kind of the review that got Rand kicked out
Hmm.
of the conservative, fusionist movement between the social conservatives and the economic libertarians. And Chambers famously said in that interview that the moral of the story in Rand's novel was to a gas chamber go.
Wow.
Whoa.
That was he actually said that in print, and but I think that maximalist kind of aesthetic
Yeah.
to radical Russian thought, that so much of what Dostoevsky's responding to there certainly creates that kind of dynamic where Dostoevsky said it himself, right? All is permitted.
Yeah. He called Europe a beautiful graveyard, didn't he?
Yeah, I believe that's
And
exactly
he just
right.
had that insight. And again, so you're talking about him being prophetic, but another way of getting to the same thing is he saw the future in the germs that, not germs, but in what was going on in Paris or any one of these where he was gambling, southern
Sure.
Germany. He just saw the seeds of it, and he saw, like, how much do you think the word machine, which comes up a lot on this podcast, to kind of see what's in the ascendant now? How would Dostoevsky have described the thing in the ascendants? A power hungry people, a machine with a pseudo intelligence of its own, steerers of a ship who try, but the ship gets away from them, people who are lusting after money, or are they lusting after power? How would he have gotten into the granular level with some of this stuff?
You're making me wish that I had more recently read like his writer's diary, or
Sure.
I mean, I guess I suppose we could point to notes from the underground by way of uh argue that that's basically a forecast of the fundamental loneliness that the modern machine creates.
Hmm.
Um, the evidence of that is all around us. AI girlfriends, and the list goes on. The off-sided college mental health crisis.
Right.
I mean, loneliness seems to me to be a real. Whether no matter whose fault it is, right? It seems to be a real feature of the modern condition. And I think if you look at something like the narrator
Yeah.
of Notes from Underground. I think that sense of loneliness emerges there. Is that kind of is that the kind of thing you were driving at?
You
That's
bet. In
interesting.
fact, I was grabbing for paper. Michael, you follow. I was just writing down the word loneliness, and I'll put it in the show's description because it's so true, and I mean that in a therapeutic, a healing sense.
Well,
You know, yeah.
you're making me think of Raskolnikov as an internet incel. He
Yeah,
thinks he's smarter than everybody,
Right, right, right.
right?
yeah,
But doesn't
yeah.
have a girlfriend, right?
But yeah, just smarter than everybody, but I don't know, but real,
Talk
believable.
about prophetic, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. He's what happens when the guy who's spent his life in his mom's basement playing Dungeons and Dragons and quoting Monty Python discovers philosophy. You know that. That's
We
I,
want to keep on recruiting that demographic to start listening to our podcast,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Aaron. I don't know if that helps or hurts.
Yeah, I just realized that
Accurate. I'm
that
glad you
was
say it.
I probably lost you 4 listeners for the price of three
Uh,
there, uh, uh,
Well
uh,
said.
yeah, or yeah, I brought up the main character from Notes from Underground, but yeah, obviously Raskolnikov and is a good example. And I think the critics always hate the last scenes of Crime and Punishment because they say that they're sappy, and so on. But in a way they are, I don't know, they're kind of I'm not a Dickens fan, but they're kind of Dickensian in
Sure.
their overtones there. But at the same time, I mean, it's the human connection, right? That pulls him out of it at the end. And that's what
Mhm.
so many of us seem to be lacking these days is the human connection. So it's hard not to see that as really quite prophetic.
Wow. Brilliant.
well, yeah, I mean, modernity is loneliness. It just is,
Yeah.
right? And I actually, I'm sure I know you saw it going through COVID as a professor. I don't know. I imagine your school was closed, and I don't think the students have ever recovered.
No,
The students post COVID, they're not the same. They're not in good
Reports
shape.
from the front say there's improvement happening, but you're right, Michael. I haven't heard that they've recovered,
No,
but it's not getting worse currently. That's what I'm hearing. I could be wrong.
no.
Yeah.
I don't know.
well, it may,
This is the first semester I haven't taught in
Yeah.
I don't know how many years.
Yeah.
okay. Yeah,
But
I would agree with that. I mean, I don't know that I'm not sure that COVID created anything truly new, but it certainly dramatically intensified trends that were there already, I
Hmm.
think. Um,
Interesting.
I was uh, one of my colleagues who has a sense of humor knows that I'm one of the last three people on earth who's never sent a text message. And so
Wow.
he that we were having this campus panel on texting quite a few years back, and he volunteered me to be on it behind my back. He was just messing with me, and
That's really funny. That's
and
great.
and this was probably, I mean, in technological terms, this was back in the mists of time, probably 12 years ago. I mean, a
Mhm.
long time as we
in
measure
technology ages, yeah.
technological development, right? And I remember even at that point, in some of the Q&A that happened afterwards, I remember a number of students talking about how it was really, really awkward to meet people who you had only ever texted with before. Like I remember one student describing this encounter they randomly had in the vegetable aisle at the grocery store where them and this other person from across the aisle realized that that's who this is, and they both put their heads down and
Yeah.
walk past each other without speaking,
Wow. Wow.
and so there's an example, an anecdotal one, but an
Well, it's
example that
powerful.
to me illustrates the kind of the power of technology to create the kind of loneliness that then I think I would agree with you guys that then the dynamics of COVID, dramatically exacerbated and that I think are still in operation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how old your kids are, but my older kids, um, talking to my oldest is 34, my youngest is 13, almost 14. And the ones in the middle, because I mean, even the oldest one who was not married, he said, "Man, it's so hard to meet people, Dad. You have no idea. There's nothing social that happens in the world except for online,
Yeah.
and it's such a false environment, and it leads to, unless not just with what I've seen in my kids, but I've seen in students over the years. Um, I don't know if I would call it not antisocial, but kind of it's like it's like an entire generation or more that hasn't been socialized to public behavior because there haven't been those opportunities, And especially when schools were closed. I think that really, um, the kids I've seen come from high school into college after that, it's a different breed of student,
So
different
it's
breed of
it's
student.
probably time for somebody to quote McLuhan saying the medium is the message, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
For
That's
sure.
because that's kind of what we're talking about, right? How the
Mhm.
the medium of communication socializes you into particularly unhealthy mode of living.
I should say, by the way, welcome to the Regenerate podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, say more about that. Like, so when you said you don't text, that's brilliant. Like Michael and I would both want to
That's
bow
badass.
before you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And talk about your relationship with technology. So our listeners might say, why Zoom with these two losers and not text, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I guess I think one of the great lies, and I imagine I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I think one of the great lies of our time is that there's such a thing as neutral technology.
Yeah.
That's it. Just I mean, obviously, Kings North, for instance, has said it way better than I am. And lots of other people have too. So I'll
He was
just
within 30 miles of me last night in Buffalo speaking at Canisius
oh.
College, maybe
Well,
4 to 5 miles. Yeah.
he was out through Montana last year, and I realized that he was and got a hold of him and said, "Hey, if you're down I-15 past Dillon," but he wasn't gonna be, but maybe we'll
Okay.
rendezvous at some point. It would be pretty cool. But uh, yeah, it's just and well the. I mean, he said it. That book I reviewed for Front Porch Republic by Anton Barbacay, that web of our own making.
Make sure you may segue to that in some way, Aaron, because
Yeah,
it's a very
that's
interesting and it ties in with our friend Preparata.
yeah. I think it does. I mean, he says it in his own way, um, and so there again, because I'm of the unapologetic view that more or less all roads lead to Dostoevsky.
Uh-huh.
He's you can get that out of his commentary on the West, and that doesn't mean you have to be you know a xenophobic Slavophile like he became a bit late in life in order to see the truth of his observations about where industrialization was taking us. So I guess I try to. There was a really good article that Adam Smith had on the Front Porch site recent, or no, it wasn't. It was Josh Pauling
Okay.
uh, had that
He's
essay.
sharp. I've never
It's out
talked
of
to
his.
him.
I'm going to interview him about that book for the New Books Network. I
Ah,
actually have a copy of it on my desk right now. But he had that book, that essay that's I think one of the essays from the book, which talks about basically how the Amish. The first question the Amish ask about any technology is, "What is this going to do to or for the community?"
I
yeah.
know.
And I didn't realize that was kind of how I had been approaching it until I read Pauling's essay there. But I think that's what my wife and I have tried to do, is not assume that technology is neutral and just kind of go with the flow. Um, but to ask for our community, as in the 9 people living under my roof, right? What is this technology going to do or contribute or not contribute? And so that's we've got an old flip phone that we take with us if we're going on trips or something like that, but that's it. I don't.
Yeah.
We don't have cell phones otherwise. And I don't know. I don't know if you guys have heard this or not, but I could retire tomorrow if I had a nickel for every time somebody has said to me, "Oh, I wish I could do that." You
Yeah, yeah.
Good
you
for
know,
you. Good for you.
like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, there's the odd boss who would fire you, but honestly, like you could, you know.
Wow. Good for you for saying that.
So that's kind of our relationship. But it is really funny though how it's kind of the ratchet effect, I think they call it, where what we think of as essential
Mhm.
moves around the ratchet, so that uh like it's probably not even smartphones now, like that's just given. That's a few clicks back on the ratchet. I'm sure there's other things that if people knew I didn't do them or didn't have them, they would, turn me into CPS or something like that.
Yeah. And
For failing.
your essential
But
framing, Aaron, for listeners of the podcast, that's I would say that's the same framing that Ivan Illich uses
yeah,
in his works on technology. It's also one of the great lessons
I
I
agree.
saw put into practice by the Trappist monks when I worked there for 6 years.
oh,
They could say that wow, the telephone was a gift from God. They could call their mother, and not as much as we might call our moms, but they could
yeah,
call their moms, and it brought them together. But they actually got a TV when the TV came out, and they plugged it in, and the abbot at that time, who was the one who identified Thomas Merton's dead body, he I think looked at the brothers' faces and just saw this kind of zombie stare
yeah,
and saw a crowd and not community, because Trappist
yeah,
life is all about community, and
right.
just saw this kind of deadening thing. And I'm glorifying a little bit, but then they put it in the closet only to bring it out for the Twin Towers and the election of like Pope John Paul II, something like that.
Well, and surely the Charlie Brown Christmas special.
Well, yeah, you would think
Yeah.
they watch two movies a year between, and those are between the week when they have no work schedule between Christmas and New Year's. Yep.
Yeah, so I was uh uh not familiar with. I'm not particular don't have any particular familiarity with the Trappist, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
Asking
Yeah.
what does this do for us versus what does it do to us, and are we happy with our answers to those kinds of questions?
Mm. Do you see a larger hope for that type of initiative, Aaron?
Um,
And you mentioned the name Adam Smith, who taught at a dorm this year, where the kids at the beginning, were
yeah,
interested in unplugging for a month. It sounds like.
yeah. You know, um, I have too many Norwegians in the family tree to be optimistic about anything. It's a sort of genetic pessimism. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, but that being said, like I think people are hungry for something better, and even if you end up, and if technology is ruling people's lives in a way that's so toxic, I can still see people giving you the response like the guy in the Bible gives to Jesus when he tells him to give away his wealth, and he's like, "Boy, that's asking too much."
Mhm.
Uh, but uh, but at the same time, like people are deeply unhappy, and I kind of have a feeling that at some point, maybe it's a bit like I'm going to invoke Lennon in a weird context here. Lennon famously said, "The worse, the better,"
Mhm.
and maybe we're getting close to the point where the worse becomes the better, in that people's relationship with technology gets so out of balance that people are willing to consider more radical solutions, like whoa, not getting rid of it,
Uh-huh.
as
Yeah.
as a potential option. I want to be careful here because the whole student privacy laws.
Sure.
I think I'm okay here since this student has graduated now, but I had a couple of fairly fascinating conversations with a former student of mine a couple of years ago, uh, where there's this whole, I can't even remember what it's called. After we get done talking, I could probably find it if you're interested. But there's
Hmm.
this whole like YouTube phenomenon of people taking pictures basically of empty rooms.
I didn't know that one. I know, like, and I'm interested in like abandoned water parks and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, if they may be related. It's got
Chernobyl.
yeah, it may be related. I would, this art movement, it kind of has a name. I just can't remember off the top of my head what it
Interesting.
is. If I'd have thought of it, we might get here. I could have looked it up beforehand. But anyway, basically what it is all these pictures of these rooms where they look like the 80s or the 90s.
Wow, wow.
And they're empty, right? So what do we do with empty vessels, right? We fill them with what we want to fill them with.
Yeah.
And this student of mine, so he's a I guess you'd call him like a late millennial, I think.
It's a fascinating movement.
So I guess what I'm getting at is like there's an example of
Do
apparently
send me the name of that movement because I'll put it in.
yeah, I can.
Please,
It's in
please.
my email.
Yeah, please.
I can
Okay.
definitely find it, but it's absolutely fascinating because there's no commentary. Sometimes there's just this weird music, but that's about it. And so what we're clearly doing here is, I mean, I remember the 80s and the 90s, and technologically speaking, I guess I'd rather live then than now, but still, when you remember things for yourself, it's a little harder to idealize them,
Uh,
and but but it's just fascinating how a younger generation is pouring this kind of vague sense of betterness. It was better back then, and that the 80s and 90s are the period in which that they've selected in order to do that.
say more about that, though. I get what you're saying. It's a very, again, you're compassionate towards it. It's a natural thing, but it's vapid in its own way. But say a little bit more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like I don't know. I mean, you guys have a few years on me, I would guess,
Mhm.
but yeah, I don't know so much that our relationship with technology was healthier then, as it is just that there was less available technology to be unhealthy with. Uh,
Wow. I'm glad I asked the question. Yeah.
well, I mean, you might. I believe I don't know that I can quote a source on this, but I believe I've read somewhere, for instance, that it was actually the porn industry that was pretty instrumental in advancing the technology that became like VHS
Wow.
uh, technology, right? You guys have heard that too?
No, I
No, I
haven't heard.
haven't. It sounds like it could be like E. Michael Jones or something like that, but it's good.
Well,
I
I
hadn't
think
heard that one. Yeah.
well, that's what happens with every one of those. I shouldn't say everyone, but so many of those technological advances,
That's
especially
interesting. Yeah.
the one of the first things that takes off is pornography. I mean, that was for I think still today, but when the internet first came, that was the first thing that blew up, right?
Yeah, so I think that so you go back to like the early industrial era, and you've got people getting killed in very unsafe industrial equipment. Take all the concern, much of it justified about overindulgence in television. Like the head of your Trappist monastery was
Uh-huh.
concerned about, and so on. I mean, I think we see kind of the same patterns repeated over time. So I'm not entirely sure that our relationship with our own technology is actually. I don't think we're different people now. I think it's that our technology is different such that it can capture us more effectively than any prior technology has ever been able to do. So in a way, I think we're kind of these we're victims waiting on a technology to more successfully colonize us than anyone ever has before. I
Mhm.
don't know. I'm thinking out loud here, but
Interesting.
does that seem reason? I mean, that's kind of Barbacay's argument in that Web of Our Own Making book that I wrote about for Front Porch Public. He calls it the most natural technology that's ever existed. I think natural, as I recall, is the word that he uses. And I think what he means by that is that it feels so natural that it's almost instantaneously. We can't imagine not having it.
And specifically, when you say it, you're saying the internet, the online presence.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
digital. He just calls it the digital is kind of his
Yeah.
shorthand
Okay.
for
Yeah.
the whole kind of nexus of technologies that you just described. And
It's almost a
presumably,
parody of when we were talking about how Dostoevsky creates worlds.
Mhm.
It's another medium in which world creation is very,
Yeah.
very easy. And then how would you describe what separates the real, like Dostoevsky's, from this?
I mean, I guess I'd go back to where we started, that in the contemporary technological context, each of us is God. Each of us is in the driver's seat. It's all about your identity and mine. It's all about, what you want right now and what I want right now, and so on. Whereas in the kind of worlds that Dostoevsky is so good at creating, Raskolnikov ultimately discovers at the end that it's not about him being the hero, but it's about something bigger than he is. So I mean, to me, that would be kind of the fundamental difference that
Wow.
Dostoevsky, in particular, is able to bring out if we if we disconnect long enough
Well,
to go back and read a novel longer than 30 pages.
well, I think part of the thing is that in the worlds that Dostoevsky or just about any novels creates, he creates them in particular by trying to put out uh, an existentialist or some kind of philosophical problem or psychological problem in human existence in modernity, whereas the worlds created in video games or other things um, don't have that's not part of it. It's just the whole point of those is just to be there and to continue to be there and to go back there again, right? It's it's soul emptying. So when you read Dostoevsky, you're confronted with the big questions, the life questions. And so you automatically almost you start to think about them, right? Well, should he do that? Was it wrong? But in a video game scenario, you're not confronted with the life questions. The whole point of the video game is to be in the video game. The whole point of reading Dostoevsky is to encounter the life questions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I spent a lot of my
Wow, that was
undergraduate
good.
career playing video games. Uh, like marathon, 12-hour video game sessions where your knees pop when you get up because you haven't moved them in 12 hours, and I remember when I got married, I basically had to quit. I didn't even pretend to keep doing that
Yeah.
because there's no point in playing games like that for less than a marathon session. There just isn't. Like it's pointless. And so to me, like, then there was inevitably going to be a competition, between those different priorities. And so yeah, I would agree with you that I think you can see some really different priorities in operation. Maybe another way of putting that point would be that, when you in an online environment, most of the time, the ultimate thing that points you to is the self looking back at you in the mirror, whereas Dostoevsky points you to something that's beyond the self,
Mhm.
Yeah, well,
and
which is an
ultimately,
answer, the beginning of an answer to the problem of loneliness.
yeah,
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 that's
yeah.
so. I think we,
But the other thing, I don't know if this is your experience, but my experience for the last at least decade, maybe 15 years of teaching was was how impossible it was for so many students to to read an article, let alone a novel, let alone a whole book, right? Um, because and my son actually is 23. He was talking about this, and he's a big reader, but he said, I he said I have to stop after a little bit because I think the internet ruined my brain, and I can't focus for that long. I need a distraction.
yeah, I certainly observe those dynamics day in and day out. I mean, you know, like like English. I mean, history is a book discipline.
Mhm.
and that's just how it is.
Yep.
Um, well, my fail rates certainly illustrate that.
Yeah.
That-
Well, you know, what's surprised. So I can't remember what the course I was teaching. I was teaching a course on something a few years ago, and I assigned the students to watch a movie. Figured that'd be an easy one, right? Watch the movie.
but the movie was too long, wasn't
That's
it?
what they said.
Yeah,
2 hours long. I'm like, dude,
yeah, I've
all
heard that
movies
one
are two
before.
hours long. But it's
Mhm.
too long. What do you mean you can't do it? I mean, how much time do you spend with the other homework?
Yeah,
I gave you
yeah,
half the time.
I regularly get I sometimes ask a bonus question on my Gen Ed level course exams that says, when you're doing the reading for this class, how often would you estimate that you stop to check a phone?
Mm.
Like, so what interval are you reading at?
Yeah.
And I regularly get answers that say the following: "Oh, not very often, only every 5 minutes or so."
I'm surprised they didn't say, "Oh, not very often." Ha 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 ha. You know, when they
Yeah,
text all those
yeah,
nervous things.
yeah,
LOL.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, LOL, right. Yeah. So,
they're worried you're mad at them.
yeah, so, think about it, like, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's fairly comical at one level, but at another level, it certainly contributes to this kind of self-obsession that's ultimately just a dead-end street, I don't know if either of you guys have ever tackled Philip Reef or not. Um,
I've spent. I find his book on colleges I've read. I don't know if I understood as much. It's learning kind of talk about worlds again, or
yeah,
Thorstein Veblen. You know, these people, they write in kind of a purposefully complicated way, I think. And so I own Charisma, and I've read The Triumph of the Therapeutic. But like people
okay.
like you and Jeremy Beer, when you're writing about him or using him, you're doing it with 50 times more felicity than I can do.
Yeah, I didn't know. I just wanted, before I made a comment,
Yeah,
see if
yeah.
you guys were familiar with him or
But I
not.
wanted his name to come up. Yeah.
There's a fantastic picture in Reef's book Death Works. Um, that's it's a it's a photograph, a self-portrait photograph that the infamous photographer Robert Mapplethorpe took of himself. That was part of that whole infamous exhibition. What was that, back in
Mhm.
the '90s or something?
Was he
Yeah.
Piss Christ or was
Yeah,
he?
no, that was Serrano.
Right, right, right.
Uh,
Mapplethorpe was
Mapplethorpe,
kind of bondage type stuff,
yeah,
wasn't
he
it?
was the bullwhip guy.
Yeah.
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 And Reef has a picture, has a print in his book Death Works, of one of the photographs from that exhibition, that is a picture Mapplethorpe took of himself. And in the picture, his fist is kind of out like this, and he's wearing this great big death's head ring.
Wow.
And and Reef's point is that, when the self becomes God, that death's head on his finger is exactly where this leads.
Hmm.
And it's rather
Yeah.
striking that, I mean, Reef was an atheist.
Yeah.
I hold out. I recently actually joined the Catholic Church myself, just
Yeah,
about
you're
2
welcome.
years ago,
Yeah.
but I'm still not quite sure what I think about purgatory. But Reef is the sort of guy that makes me hope there's a purgatory,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I hope he made it.
Yeah.
He gets so close so often,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
that uh, uh,
Is that a decent segue? And Michael, stop me. But if we did say 15 more minutes, but at least we could begin this subject. But so people can, I like giving our listeners a chance to go read something.
yeah,
And so about a week and a half ago, you wrote a review of a book on Front Porch Republic. And I'm going to describe it very briefly. Then I want you to kind of comment on that and tie it into the move
okay,
that Mapplethorpe made. It was the Death Heads. That it was a book about kind of the book you reviewed was a book about the origins of like postmodernity and some of the craziness we're seeing now. And it's from an Ivy League professor. And this guy's kind of almost like telling an open secret, or he's revealing truths that are normally kept hidden, but then playing games within his book. But he's kind of saying that it's the Guido Preparata thesis. And I sent our guest tonight, Aaron, a short review that I thought was fairly intelligent on Preparata's book called The Ideology of Tyranny, where he calls this whole new construct, he calls it a very conservative operation. It doesn't touch the class structure. It gets us fighting about in-house stuff.
Yeah.
And he wants to say the origin is through Foucault. It splits to a neoconservative variant, and it's there in Foucault, but it goes to the origin of Georges Bataille. Now, Georges Bataille is a pornographic French sociologist, but also kind of, created a movement that focused on an image of the self, kind of pornographic violence. Um, that Start with that book review. What did you think of that book when you were reading it? Did you buy the thesis? Did you?
I think it's too soon to tell.
Okay, yeah.
And I kind of said that in my review that I wasn't quite sure what to make of the thesis because on the one hand, at one level I think he's right. So Musal Garbi,
He's Princeton, is it?
No, it's Columbia.
Okay.
He's at Columbia. So at one level, I think he's right. That all of the discourse that goes, to use a Foucauldian term, that goes underneath the heading woke is generally pretty self-serving, and his empirical evidence for that is really fairly compelling. I think that's something that most people of a critical mindset have kind of suspected for a long time. So what's the real merit of that book is to provide a whole pile of empirical evidence that shows kind of deductively what I think most of us have sort of suspected, or sorry, shows inductively what most of us have suspected to be the case deductively for quite a while. In particular, I mean, just to cite a bit of his evidence, one of the things that really stood out to me was the difference between the number of people who report having a non-straight sexual identity versus the number of people who report having actually had a non-straight sexual encounter. And the difference between those two things is a lot, to put it not very precisely.
Wow.
It's that's a question that had never occurred to me to ask before I read that book, and there's and in his rendition, there's a lot of money and power to be gained by identifying as something that you don't actually practice. As
That's how academia works.
yeah, and when you think about it, that's where most bad ideas originate anyway, and so it's not all that surprising, really. Wasn't it Orwell who said that there's some ideas so dumb that only an intellectual could believe them,
That's right.
and so that was really interesting. The part of the book that really left me uncertain is when you're writing a book that's arguing reality isn't what it appears to be. How do I know that the book is what it appears to be? I mean, if somebody from inside a reality is basically writing what amounts to an expose, how do I know I'm not, I guess to use the internet lingo, effectively being trolled?
Yeah. We would need to know something about the author in particular.
Yeah.
Does he belong to a pacifist tradition? Things like that. Yep.
Yeah, and the author is really, I mean, he's actually, his own background is part of the argument for the book, because he's arguing that he's right up front about how his own background as being Black in America enables him to say things that other people might have more trouble saying. Right. And so, and in that sense, like, I mean, it's a really effective presentation of the subject matter. But at the same time, the fact is that he can get a lot more money and power by saying what he said, right? Because there are two choices here, right? Either he's going to get run out of the academy for saying what he said in that book, or he's going to get co-opted into its self-preserving narrative.
Right.
Like now the cool people, the people who are with it, are the people who criticize themselves in the same way that the Maoists did at struggle sessions in the '60s. You know,
Yeah.
that's how you. I could totally see 5 years from now, 21st century struggle sessions that have
Oh yeah.
people under the heading woke getting together and criticizing themselves for not being sincere enough, for not, walking the talk, and citing this book as you see what I mean? There's like
Yeah.
this downward spiral it's almost a bit like conspiracy theory where you can't disprove it because there's always another layer of conspiracy. And
Yeah.
so I will be, I meant what I said in the review that well, I suppose being a Muslim, I guess I was probably insensitive by saying he's the sort of guy I'd like to have a beer with. But um, anyway, I really I don't know when I ever would, because obviously these aren't the circles I run in. But I would love to sit down with the guy and get more of a sense of who he is personally and kind of what his long term objectives are, if any, in writing a book like that.
My sense, just for the record, you can only read the book if you want to, but the basic synopsis merges totally well with Preparata's. And Preparata's, I know the guy, I've spent time with him. Kind as the sky is blue, just to convince, it's put his reputation out there, as dad did, against things like nuclear war.
Okay.
We have reason to believe maybe his dad was assassinated, things like that. Guido's gotten fired from his work at the Vatican and others for truths he's trying to tell. So he's paid. He's just trying to teach guitar lessons in Italy after he was working at a Steiner school, after writing some of the most important books in American history, I think.
That's what he's doing now?
Yeah, now he's out in Italy. He's jobless,
Okay.
What is he doing? Yeah, I think he's interested in teaching music classes.
Okay.
They're kind of rehabbing a place. Yeah, it's a really interesting story. But if you're interested in this, another way to get at that is like cross compare the basic thesis and the telling of the tale, because
Okay.
we need to tell this tale, to see how this pose. The other way of framing the same question is, where on the American left is a party of dissent? You know, um, because this thesis accounts for what we see in politics now, where the party of the left is wedded to power through their fascination with
Yeah.
the CIA. The party of the left is, just wedded to the
War.
establishment.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael.
They're committed to war.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I
Big
mean,
pharma.
how weird is it that in our lifetime, it's the Republicans who are getting in trouble for wanting to cut war funding, and the Democrats who are
Yeah,
calling them unpatriotic for asking to do so.
I know.
It's
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's quite
yeah,
surreal. I mean,
yeah.
uh, I'm old enough to remember the end of the Cold War and so on. It's a very, very strange realignment that's happening right
Yeah.
around us.
What and it might be, and this is what I'm more and more thinking. It's not really I think the alignment is not necessarily, but I do agree with it. It seems like they reverse polarities,
Mhm.
certainly in my lifetime. But I think the realignment right now might be going between a kind of right-left populist coalition and the neocon neoliberal coalition. And
Yeah,
guess which side's in favor of war all the time?
yeah, the side that makes money at it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
that's the money always wins.
Say
Oh.
more on that, Aaron.
Speaking
As you were asking the question.
speaking of Norwegian pessimism.
Yeah.
Yeah, just from Montana, from the life you live. Michael and I are in different versions of bubbles, in and out of many. What
Okay.
the hell's going on? You know?
So just like what's happening in the state of Montana these days?
Yeah, in one sense, what's going on in Montana, like the intersection, that's one aspect, and also what's going on in electoral politics. But I was going to ask you seriously about your sense of Montana. So many people have watched the show Yellowstone, but let's just put it this way: in that part of the country, you see the intersection of things like Native American rights, the money behind tourism, the money behind just buying land for the sake of investing in land.
Yeah.
You see a microcosm of like the whole world. Tell us what you're seeing out there. What are people saying?
Um, it's getting better, that's for sure. I mean,
Say more. Yeah.
that will surprise nobody. I mean, politics everywhere is getting more bitter,
Well, I think you said better, not bitter.
no, bitter, like with an I, not an
Yeah,
E.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm shocked.
So yeah, certainly. So we have the dubious distinction this year of having perhaps the most important Senate race is happening in this state.
Hmm.
Since who wins the Montana, Senate race could potentially, or is likely, I gather, to decide control of the Senate at the national level. So Montana isn't usually one of the states, that's in the news all the time in national elections, but this year it certainly is.
Yeah, yeah.
So that being said, I mean, one of the big sort of like the focuses of campaign propaganda is who's really from around here and who isn't, who's a carpetbagger and who isn't, who's an out-of-state billionaire and who isn't.
Hmm.
And I've never seen the show Yellowstone. I don't watch
Yeah.
TV, so I don't I'm not sure entirely what impressions people are getting about around here
Hmm.
from that show, but certainly the the question of cost of living, for instance, in particular, is a really hot button issue. Um, I believe I'd have to go. Don't quote me on the exact figure here, but I believe that the average rise in property taxes in Montana at the last assessment cycle was somewhere in the low 40%.
Wow.
And that's all because of the aftermath of COVID.
Yeah.
Um, and so you guys have probably seen, the signs in towns in Texas that says if you're from California, leave your politics there and you're welcome. And
Uh-huh.
there's certainly that dynamic is very much in play here
Wow.
in rural
Wow.
Montana, and certainly um and the cost of living issue really is, like, for a lot of people, it's existential.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there have been people living in tents on the streets for years now in Bozeman and in
Hmm.
campers in parking lots and stuff like that. Um, and maybe let me I'll give you just a local example here. So, Dillon's pretty out of the way. I mean, there's, Eastern Montana's even more out of the way than we are, but still, because you're in New York, right?
Yep. I am upstate New York, and Michael's in lower Michigan, lower Western
Oh,
Michigan.
okay. So, uh, there are parts of Montana that are even more rural than Beaverhead County. That being said, where I live, Beaverhead County is about the same square mileage as the state of Connecticut, and
Okay.
it has 10,000 people in it.
Wow. Wow.
Or
Yeah.
maybe a little more now.
Yeah.
So that gives you a sense of the
Yeah.
density level here, right? So
Hmm.
anyway, that being said, when we moved to Dillon in the summer of '07, uh, what I saved on car insurance alone paid for 4 months of my rent uh,
Mm.
for a year, and it's that kind of thing that has totally evaporated in the last few years.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, to put that, in terms of what does that mean for a person trying to make a go of it day to day, and it means that you simply can't move here and get a job and make a living. You can't.
Right. Right.
It's
Right.
it's it's impossible. Um, that's the only way we got in, was because we got in when we did. and that's the only way. And so I think that, speaking to the kind of thing that, tends to be of concern, say at the, front porch site and so on, one of the things that results in is this kind of increasing dynamic of the lords and the serfs.
Yep. Yeah. A
You know,
techno neo-feudalism. Yep.
yeah, I was thinking, wasn't that Kotkin? That
I see it different places. There's a blogger.
Okay.
That would be a term that we see in Preparato's works. I use it a
Okay.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see the emergence of that kind of, lord client sort of society. I see it. I build a lot of custom furniture for people on the side of teaching history at the university here, and I certainly see it when I deliver a $2,000 table to somebody.
Mhm.
We really have that there are a substantial number of people around here that have plenty of money to do that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And as last I checked, the median income in Beaverhead County was about $33,000 or $34,000 a year.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? So that's that.
Yeah.
So it's really, really difficult if we think about the good life as plunking down somewhere, putting down some roots, raising a family, being part of the community, and all of those kind of things that really make life good. The last few years have made it very, very difficult to do that around here if you're
Wow.
not there already. So maybe that's a good way of kind of summing up what things kind of look like.
Aaron the Norwegian.
What's that?
Aaron the Norwegian.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the skeptical, the pessimistic. No, but true. But I think it is a good segue into or a time to kind of wrap it up, thinking that I'd like to have you on again and not into the too distant future. I know our listeners, Michael and I kind of know what they like, and they really like authenticity. There was no part of this conversation that was scripted in advance, and you had fun with it, and we had fun with it. So Aaron Weinacht, I hope you come back again. I encourage people to look at this recent review at Front Porch Republic, then link to his other works. And then send me that artistic movement.
Yeah, I will. I'll find it on my email.
And if you have any other links so people can access your book and things, Aaron, send that too, and I'll put it in the description. But let's have you back on soon if you're willing. And thank you so much for coming on. Michael, what's going on for you this weekend? And sign us off, my friend.
There is something I can't remember. I have
It's
to.
so beautiful in
I have to
this
get
part of the
bees
country,
ready
Aaron.
for
It's
winter.
so beautiful. The bees. My wife, what did she do? It had to do with, she kept a lot of honey. We're new. We had 4 hives. They all did really well. She was keeping a lot of honey, thinking that's the best thing she could do for the bees this summer. They produced a lot. She could have probably extracted more. What do you do for wintering? Do you leave honey in there, or do you do the
Oh yeah,
sugar
I
water?
leave at least a full super full of honey.
Yeah. And all your hives did well this year?
No.
Oh, okay.
One of them did well. Well, they did well, but what happened toward the end there? I had 2, and the other one got robbed out.
Okay. From what?
By other bees, probably my
Okay.
hive
Yeah.
and yellow jackets. That they just do that.
We're so lucky to have just, it's a third of an acre, but it's just fenced in so well. One was a rich doctor who lived next to us, which has part of the fence years ago, like 40 years ago, this amazing fence. We shared the cost of a new one with our wonderful neighbors on one side. It's really high. And then on the other side, we installed one. But so for gardening and our hives, we have a lot of black bear around here. They're getting into things like that. For our hives and for my own garden, just varmints just aren't a thing. But inventing and festing for us was fun. But Michael, sign us off.
All right, well, we'll see everybody next time, and thanks for coming to the Regeneration Podcast.
No, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, we'll have you on again, Aaron. Thanks again.